All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 11 o'clock sessions at the North Carolina GIS Conference. You are in the session titled Census and State Estimates in North Carolina. My name is David Giordano. I'll be the moderator for the 30 minutes here. Just a couple of housekeeping things. As a reminder to the attendees, your microphones and video feed is muted. So if you have any questions, please feel free to enter those in the chat at any point. And we'll have a few minutes at the end of the session to go over those questions and answers. Also, keep in mind that this session and all the other sessions from the GIS conference is being recorded and will be on the NC GIS Conference YouTube channel for you to view. So let's go ahead and introduce our speakers this morning, Bob Coates and Dr. Mike Klein. Mr. Coates serves as the Governor's Census Liaison and Coordinator of the North Carolina State Data Center Network. The State Data Center Network is a partnership between the U.S. Census Bureau and 45 affiliate organizations across North Carolina. Mr. Coates served 3 terms on the National State Data Center Steering Committee. He is a member of the North Carolina Geographic Information Coordinating Council and has worked in data analysis with state government for over 25 years. Dr. Klein is the state demographer for North Carolina and annually produces the official population estimates for the state, counties, and municipalities. In addition, he prepares 20-year population projections for the counties and the state, advises state agencies and the governor's office regarding the implications of demographic change, and supports census-related activities. He moved to North Carolina in 2017 after a long career in Texas, including a stint working within the Office of the State Demographer of Texas, and most recently as the Associate Director of the Hobby Center for the Study of Texas at Rice University. Dr. Klein has authored or co-authored several books, book chapters, and articles, including Population Change in the United States, Socioeconomic Challenges and Opportunities in the 21st Century, as well as Changing Texas, Implications of Addressing or Ignoring the Texas Challenge. Dr. Klein earned his PhD in demography from Texas San Antonio, his master's in geography from Kansas State, and his BA in geography from Texas Tech. And now I turn it over to Bob. Please, Bob, go ahead.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks everyone for attending this session. As David mentioned, I'm the Governor's Census Liaison in North Carolina and the coordinator for the North Carolina State Data Center. So my role this morning, I want to just kind of give you a quick overview of what we've done to prepare geospatially for the 2020 census, what we can expect to get in terms of data back geospatially, and when you can expect to see some numbers to go with those new geographies, and then the processes that are in place, what's going to happen census-wise going forward in terms of challenges and ongoing operations. So I'm sure everyone heard this over the past couple of months leading up to Census Day. Why do we care about the census in North Carolina? Well, it's required for our representation in the House of Representatives. The census count is used to determine how seats are apportioned among the states, and North Carolina going into the census was projected to gain another seat. So an extra voice for North Carolina in Congress means that we're better represented and our concerns and needs are better expressed. Also, the census count is the foundation for federal formula funding in the state. So going into the census, the top tier federal funding programs obligated about $1,623 per person per year in federal funds based on the census count. And North Carolina obligated about $200 per person per year in state funding. So that's $1,823 per person per year in funding coming back into our communities based on an accurate census count. And also, as you know, the census is only done once every 10 years. So getting that good snapshot of who our communities are, what we look like, how we've changed and how we are changing helps to inform local governments in providing services. And it's also a key tool for economic development. A lot of businesses are looking at the census numbers to evaluate what their future workforce or what their future market may look like. So that's why we care about the census. To prepare for the census, there are a number of geographic programs. Some of these are ongoing. Some of these are kind of intermittent. The Geographic Support System Initiative, or GSSI, happened in 2015, where the state of North Carolina provided an address list for residential and group quarters addresses that the state had to help the Census Bureau fill in gaps that they may have on the master address file. That program will probably exist going forward. It's not something that's scheduled to happen every year or every 2 to 3 years, but the Census Bureau feels that that was a success. And so that option may come back as soon as the Census Bureau needs it. The Boundary and Annexation Survey is an annual operation where the Census Bureau is verifying any changes to municipal, county, and state boundaries. That's something that's going on right now, but it's an operation that happens every year. The Census Redistricting operation is a process to go through and establish the boundaries for the smallest geographic units, the census blocks, and also voting precincts, because as we just mentioned, the census data is needed for redistricting or apportionment of seats. It's also used for redistricting. So having those small geographic boundaries set is important before the data is released. So there's a geographic operation to verify those. There's a big operation that I know a lot of local governments were involved with, the Local Update of Census Addresses, or LUCA. This is where, if you signed off on the confidentiality agreement, the Census Bureau would provide you the residential and group quarters addresses for your jurisdiction, and you could verify those addresses or fill in any gaps that the Census Bureau may have missed. This has been a popular program. It's time intensive. And it does have a limited scope. I think it was 120 days to verify all the addresses in your region. But it is very critical. It helps to verify that all the potential residential addresses are actually getting those census questionnaires. And we had good participation in North Carolina on that. Following up on the Local Update of Census Addresses program was the PSAP program, or the Participant Statistical Areas program. That program allowed local governments to suggest changes to the boundaries of statistical geographies. These are things like census tracts, block groups. These are how you will get data from intercensal surveys like the American Community Survey for the next 10 years. These statistical areas tend not to change an awful lot between the censuses, and this program was your opportunity to maybe suggest some boundaries that would be most helpful to local governments for planning going forward. You might be able to recommend that a census tract include a certain neighborhood that's important for future growth. And the final program was the new construction program. Obviously, in a state that's growing as rapidly as North Carolina, we had a lot of new addresses that were created after the Local Update of Census Addresses program. So the new construction program allowed local governments to provide the Census Bureau with these new addresses, again, to make sure that everyone living in an area was going to be counted for the census. Now, once all that preparation work was done, and that happened over a 4 to 5 year period, we actually got into counting everyone. The census day was April 1st of 2020. Census forms were mailed out in the middle of March 2020. That also coincides with when COVID hit really harshly. So that was an added challenge that no one could have anticipated. But at the end of data collection, the self-response window closed on October 15th. 63.4% of North Carolina households had responded, little less than the national average. And you can see the distribution of where the folks did a better job of responding and where folks did a less outstanding job of responding. Now, it doesn't mean that those areas, that 63.4%, it doesn't mean that the rest of that population wasn't counted. It just means that that was the population the Census Bureau had to go out door to door, knocking on doors and trying to get those folks who didn't respond either online, by phone, or by mail. Okay, so that's the operation that really happened through the end of October. When can we expect to get our hands on some information? Obviously, as we just mentioned, COVID has had a big impact on the overall census operation. And there were some products that were supposed to already have been released, but have not been because of COVID. However, the one thing that has been released is the geospatial data for redistricting. These are going to be the shape files that will have all the municipal boundary changes, all the participant statistical area changes, those census tracts, block groups. Those boundaries have been released. For North Carolina, the data was released on January 26th. And some of these are still being released for other states on a flow basis. And I've included the web address here for you to download those shapefiles. I really encourage everyone to go ahead and download those now and get those loaded into your GIS system. We'll talk a little bit about why you need to have those ready right now in a few more slides. But I would like to point out that David Klein, who is a geographer with the U.S. Census Bureau, is presenting at noon today. So if you have questions about this product or any of those geospatial programs that the Census Bureau conducted, I'm happy to field your questions, but also David can probably speak to those as well. So in terms of that's geospatial data that's available. The shapefiles for North Carolina were released on the 26th of January. But what about the data to go with those? Now, the census originally was planning to release apportionment data. That is the total state populations that drives how seats are distributed in the House of Representatives. Those were supposed to be released on December 31st of 2020. But due to COVID, that release has been delayed. The Census Bureau is now saying that that data will be released before April 30th of this year. Following that release, the redistricting data, the actual demographic data from the redistricting release, that's the detailed population by age, race, and sex down to the census block level. That was supposed to be released by April 1st on 2021 on a flow basis. On Friday, last Friday, the Census Bureau announced that that has been delayed so that the redistricting data will be released before September 30th of 2021. And now all of those data for all states will be released at one time rather than on a flow basis. So the geospatial files that were released on the in late January for North Carolina, the data for that will be coming out probably in September sometime. So the data to go with those geographies will be available for some time now. Following the redistricting release, the Census Bureau does plan to release a demographic and housing characteristics file, DHC. This replaces the old summary file, one that you may be familiar with from previous censuses. And the Census Bureau does plan to release a congressional district demographic and housing characteristic file. Although they have not released planned release dates for those, it will probably be in 2022 at the earliest. So one thing that does need to be pointed out right now, and I don't want to spend an awful lot of time on this, but there's a lot to talk about here. The Census Bureau has always been committed to protecting the privacy of individual responses to the census. They are required by Title 13 of the U.S. Code to maintain confidentiality. And in the past, that has involved some data swapping, and noise added into data to protect the confidentiality of data. However, the Census Bureau has recognized that the power of computing has jumped exponentially. They also recognize that there are that hackers out there have become more sophisticated. So to deal with that, they have adopted a new privacy, the disclosure avoidance system, which does include something called differential privacy. This policy will intentionally include a privacy loss budget that is added to all data tables to ensure the security of the information. Now, what that does mean is that all the data that you look at from census releases will be intentionally fuzzy. There are a couple of exemptions from that, and these are known as invariants. So the total population at the state level will not have the differential privacy noise added to it. That will be the number that was actually counted. The total housing unit count and the total number of group quarters by type at the census block level will also be the numbers that were actually counted by the Census Bureau. They will not have the privacy loss budget noise added to them. So everything else, the total population at the county level, at the municipal level, that will have noise added to it. So you need to be aware of that as we start talking about your challenge opportunities going forward. The differential privacy disclosure avoidance system, the Census Bureau is still working out how this will be applied to some specific data tables and to some small population groups, because there are some questions about how can they produce that data reliably. So initially, we may not see as much data as we're used to seeing with some census releases. And it's important to note the differential privacy will also be applied to all census data going forward. And that's everything from the American Community Survey to annual surveys. Any data that the census produces going forward will have this policy applied to it. Very quickly, here's a slide that the Census Bureau produced talking about some products that they plan to release, but there may be some delays on. Of note are tables that require complex person and household joins. So while you will see initial data on the number of people in an area, and you will see tables on the number of housing units in an area, being able to get data on persons per household, the Census Bureau isn't sure how they're going to be able to release that, at least initially. Detailed tables on race and Hispanic origin. So if you want to find the number of people who are white and Asian and Hispanic, they're not sure how they're going to be able to release that data, at least initially. It will be coming later. So I just want folks to understand that while there may be some limited data availability early, it will be coming later. The Census Bureau is still collecting feedback on differential privacy. I've included the email address here for the differential privacy team. There are some demonstration products. There are some metrics on revisions to the differential privacy policy that the Census Bureau has put out there. If you have concerns, if you have recommendations, and specifically if you have requirements for using census data at smaller geographic levels, that may be driving policy, that may be driving funding and services. If you have specific data needs, the product development team or at the Census Bureau really needs to know that now. They would encourage you to send those specific needs into that email address so they can factor that into their considerations for differential privacy going forward. Now, all of that, I tell you all of that because once the data is released, and remember the redistricting data now is scheduled to be released before September 30th. On October 1st of this year, the count question resolution program is scheduled to begin. The CQR operation is a free challenge opportunity of 2020 census counts by tribal or local governments only. So if you are a nonprofit organization, if you are a citizens group, if you have concerns about your census data, only the highest elected officials or tribal leaders will be allowed to issue a challenge to the 2020 census counts. The census challenges must be based on boundary issues. The Census Bureau had an incorrect boundary for a municipality or a county. A geocoding issue, that means the Census Bureau counted something like a subdivision, maybe a group quarters like a college dorm or a prison, but they counted it outside of a city limit and it should have been inside the city limit. That's a geocoding error. And you can make a challenge based on that. Or coverage issues. Maybe there's a new development in a community, but looking at the detailed data that comes out, it looks like the Census Bureau didn't count that area. You can make a challenge based on that. Now, the differential privacy conversation that we just had applies here. So when you look at your population counts for a municipality or for a county, understand that that population number is going to have noise added to it. So you can't really make a challenge, a CQR challenge based on the population. You'll have to make a challenge based on the number of housing units or group quarters in that area because those will not have the noise added to them. So we're encouraging all local folks right now to go ahead, upload the geospatial files that were just released by the Census Bureau into your GIS system and begin collecting any local information you have that will document the number of housing units and any occupancy information that you would have had as of April 1st of 2020. That local information is going to be your tools to analyze the census data when it is released, to see how solid it may be, and to inform whether or not you need to make a challenge and help you make that challenge if you need to do it. The Census Bureau will be releasing a GUPS software to assist with your CQR challenges. If you've been involved with LUCA, the Participant Statistical Areas Program, or any of those pre-census geographic preparation programs, you may be familiar with GUPS. It stands for the Geographic Update Partnership Software. You don't have to use GUPS to do any of these programs or to provide a challenge. The nice thing about it is GUPS does have the business intelligence built into it. So if you're trying to do a boundary change in Bass, or you're trying to make a challenge and you violate a rule that the Census Bureau is going to enforce, the GUPS system will let you know that in advance. However, you can use whatever GIS system you have in your shop to do the challenge. Now, I do want to point out, as I mentioned earlier, the Boundary and Annexation Survey is an annual survey that the Census Bureau does. It's going on right now. BAS is there to capture any legal boundary changes that went into place as of January 1st of the calendar year. Materials are mailed either in late December or early January, and any boundary changes that you report now before March 1st will be reflected in Census Bureau products that are released this calendar year, like the American Community Survey data that are coming out later this fall, or annual estimates coming out from the Census Bureau. If you miss that March 1st deadline, but you get your information in before May 1st, you won't see those boundaries reflected in this year's data, but they will be reflected in next year's boundary and annexation survey materials. Once this meeting is over, the folks here in North Carolina, and I'm sure in other states as well, will be conducting the non-response follow-up on BAS, calling those municipalities and counties that haven't responded to make sure they know that the deadline is rapidly approaching. And Dr. Klein is going to be speaking pretty soon about his operation. He conducts his own survey. It's important to recognize that the BAS survey is different from the state demographer survey, and local governments in North Carolina should complete both. Now, in terms of a boundary and annexation survey, a lot of municipalities don't have changes from year to year, and that's okay. There's certainly a quick way on the online response to BAS to say that we don't have any boundary changes, but we are encouraging every local government to take a look at the boundaries that the Census Bureau has for them. The BAS program, once upon a time, was a paper and pencil, and you see a screenshot here of what BAS used to look like not too long ago. So just because you haven't had a boundary change in the last year or two may not mean that the Census Bureau has accurate boundaries for you. That migration from paper to digital could have brought over some errors. And it's always a good idea just to take a quick look each year to make sure that the boundaries the Census Bureau has are correct. In North Carolina, the certifying entity for BAS operations is the Land Records Management Division of the Secretary of State's office, and they have a legislative mandate to maintain the boundaries for North Carolina. However, that piece of legislation has a little bit of a loophole in it. So we want to make sure going forward, the state of North Carolina is developing a municipal boundary resource that would have the official boundaries for all North Carolina municipalities. And that would be for use not only in the boundary annexation survey, but also to meet state government needs. This is something that the North Carolina Geographic Information Coordinating Council has been working on. And we hope to have a prototype layer of this municipal boundary resource available by the end of 2021. Once that's in place and going forward, that will allow the state to have a BAS statewide agreement. So the state could provide boundary updates to the Census Bureau each year and lighten the load on local governments. Finally, the one thing I want to mention is the Census Bureau has recently released the proposed boundary or proposed criteria changes for defining metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas. The Federal Register notice on this came out in January 19th. The actual definition of these metro areas probably will not happen until after the closing of the CQR program, the Count Question Resolution Program. I've included a link here to the Federal Register notice, and the deadline to respond is March 19th. The biggest issue here, the biggest change that we see is the Census Bureau is proposing to move the threshold for urbanized areas from 50,000 to 100,000 for consideration as a metropolitan statistical area. So that 50,000 threshold has been in place really since the early 50s. And the Census Bureau has recognized that our population obviously is changing a lot. So they're proposing to move that threshold up to 100,000. In North Carolina, that would mean that we have 3 current metropolitan statistical areas that would now become micropolitan statistical areas. If you have concerns about that, if you would like to weigh in, we're encouraging everyone to take advantage of the comment window on that Federal Register notice. So that's the end of my quick update on census operations and when data will be released. You see my contact information here. I'll leave that there for a moment, and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow Dr. Klein to take over, and we'll field any questions you have at the end of the session. So thank you for your time.
Just to interject real quick, folks, we're scheduled to go until 11:30. That's a break that starts at that time. We do have a bit of a buffer. At 11:30, I think we've got like a 15-minute buffer. So if we do run over, we've got that time if we need it. If the attendees want to Leave after 11:30, that's fine. Nobody will be offended. But we do have some extra time if we need it. Mike, you ready to share your screen?
Mike, I'm not hearing you. Are you muted?
Yeah, Mike, you're not coming through.
Can you hear me?
There you are. Oh, yeah, I can hear you, Mike. It looks like you're sharing your speaker view rather than the presentation view in PowerPoint.
Okay. How was that?
I think that's got it.
Okay.
Yep, that's good.
Apologize. I had a glitch right before it started. So North Carolina's added a little over 1 million people over the last decade. We expect to, once the Census Bureau releases the 2020 census numbers, we expect our numbers to be around 10.6 million. These are the Census Bureau's population estimates they produced in December using the 2010 census as a base. So they're not actually including any of the 2020 information, but we still expect it to be about 10.6 million people. Although this was robust, it's not as great a gain as we saw in the last 2 decades, where we added about 1.4 million in the 1990s and 2000s. And our percentage growth was actually the slowest growth we've seen. You'd have to go back to the Civil War, that decade of the Civil War. About 2/3 of our growth is from net migration, more people moving into the state than leaving. And of that net migration, about 3/4 of that is domestic or state-to-state migration. So we're a little bit unique among the states. Only 1 of 22 states have more people moving in than leaving the state. And only Texas and Florida had more state-to-state migrants. And after this week, we may see more Texans leaving for North Carolina. And as we know, that growth is not distributed throughout the state. It's primarily occurred in our major urban areas. As with the United States as a whole, our growth is primarily in urban areas and losses in rural or non-metropolitan areas. And that's true in North Carolina, with our growth primarily in the Triangle, the Charlotte region, and in the Wilmington area. And in fact, that area of around Wilmington is some of the fastest growing areas in the country. We just produced our population projections. They have not been posted, but they will be posted up next week. And normally we do 20-year projections. We actually prepared 30-year projections this time. And so if we look forward to 2050, we expect to gain about 3.4 million people between now and 2050. And that includes a slower growth in this interim period as a result of COVID, both as a result of increased deaths, decline in fertility in the short term, and lowered net migration, both international and domestic. So if we look to 2040, we still see these same trends occurring, primarily in the urban areas, and losses in our rural counties in the eastern part of North Carolina. So we produce the municipal population estimates on an annual basis, county estimates on an annual basis, and then the 20-year projections are now 30-year projections in the fall. And as David mentioned, we do demographic analysis for agencies and other groups. And we also work with the Census Bureau in their population estimates. They do a set of annual population estimates for places and counties. They're going to be using a different model, but we provide some of the data inputs for their model, and also provide some feedback, get to see some of the estimates prior to them being published. So making sure that we capture any issues going on in North Carolina. And if you work for a local community and have questions with the Census Bureau's estimates, you can always contact me, because we can always look into seeing if there's any sort of issue in their data inputs. And we have actually helped communities challenge the Census Bureau's estimates. As Bob noted, there's an annual boundary annexation survey by the Census Bureau. That's different than my annual survey that goes out in July. It's different for a few different reasons. One is that boundary is a different period. Census Bureau is always looking at January 1st of the estimate year, and I'm looking at July 1st of the estimate year and July 1st of the current year. My survey goes out during the summer. I'm asking questions about all the annexations that have occurred during the year, what their effective dates are, and whether or not there's some housing units on on those annexations. And it also gives you an opportunity to update any annexations that have occurred in the past. So a lot of times some property is annexed and there's no building built on that annexation, but over a course of a couple of years, there's some new houses on that. So we can update that information for our estimates. Typically, the Census Bureau provides annual population estimates, and this is their typical schedule: state estimates in December, county estimates in March, place or incorporated place estimates in May, along with the housing unit estimates, and then more specific detailed county estimates in June. This current year, because of the Census Bureau's delay in releases, that's actually pushed back the Census Bureau's population estimates program to May for the county estimates, and the later dates within May and June for those other estimates. You see on the other side, my typical estimate time frame, and at this moment, I don't know if there's going to be any changes to that. So just keep an eye on our website for any details in that schedule. Over the last year, we added a Twitter feed, so you can follow me on Twitter, and I usually highlight a small town on Small Town Tuesdays. Also have a blog post that keeps abreast of different demographic trends, looking at our estimates. The Census Bureau's estimates are released in December, and then we'll in the future, we'll be looking at the potential impacts of COVID. We also have a data platform, which is a subdomain of the link system that Bob has, but the only difference is the data sets on my subdomain has a lot more detailed in terms of if you're looking for age, race, ethnicity specific data, both my estimates and projections going forward. And that's it.
Thanks, Mike. Good information there. Let's jump into some questions I've got queued up. Rachel Patterson asks, Bob, I think this is for you. Who should we contact if we notice that none of the additions we submitted in 2020 showed up in the data for 2021 for Bass?
Okay, so you submitted information on Bass in 2020, but you're not seeing it showing up on the materials that you got for this year's Bass information. The first thing I would encourage you to do is to contact the Land Records Management Division at the Secretary of State's office. They're the certifying entity for Bass materials. So if you did an annexation that would have been in place on January 1st and you didn't notify them of that change, when they see materials come in, boundary changes come in through the Boundary and Annexation Survey, if you reported your changes to the Census Bureau and not to the state doesn't know that that boundary is actually there, that a change happened. So they may not have certified it. So I would encourage you to first check with the Land Records Management Division. And the manager of that division is Rich Elkins. So touch base with him. You can also touch base with the Census Bureau at geo.bass, B-A-S, at census.gov. If you have questions, they're usually pretty good about getting back in touch with you.
And I'll just add, Bob, on my surveys, I work closely with the land records folks also. So I'm always checking the annexations that they have reported. And then if there's something that doesn't match where I've got information on annexations, I'll share that with them. And then, so that's another way of making sure that there's completeness in the data.
Right, and I mentioned the Municipal Boundaries tool or product that's being developed through the GICC, the Geographic Information Coordinating Council. That process has a verification loop where once the foundational geography, the foundational municipal boundaries layer is created, there's a loop that includes the local governments being able to see at any time what their boundaries are and to let folks know this doesn't look right. So we hope to have a system in place to make sure that this verification at the state level happens as frequently as it needs to happen to make sure that we're accurate. So going forward, we hope to have a product that's going to address these type of concerns.
Blake Esselstein asks, I've heard that the differential privacy will be optimized for different geographic hierarchies in different parts of the country. Is it known which hierarchy will be optimized for North Carolina?
There was a webinar yesterday with the Census Bureau discussing differential privacy towards Native American tribal areas. What we heard from that is that there will be a couple of different, there's a group 1 release, which is really what we talked about today. So optimization is going to be, we know that the state populations will be invariant, and there will be focusing on trying to allocate the privacy loss budget in such a way that they're providing the most accurate data for political boundaries, things like counties and municipalities. The second tier of, so as part of that first group 1 operation, there may not be data released for tribal areas. The group 2 release that we heard about on yesterday's webinar would include some of these tribal areas, and there would be a different version of differential privacy applied to that group producing data products specifically targeted toward those areas. So what I can tell you is there are still some decisions that haven't been finalized for differential privacy, and that may include some of the question that we've just heard about. The Census Bureau has committed to making those final decisions sometime this summer so that those decisions will be finalized and will be applied to the redistricting data coming out sometime before September 30th. So the Census Bureau did mention that they do plan on releasing some microdata files with the newer iterations. They're still tweaking some of the differential privacy processes, and we should still see some metrics on performance for that. I don't have a firm date for you, but they're saying later this year.
Okay. Well, I hope that answers your question. Thank you, Bob. Justin asks, has the 2020 Metropolitan Statistical Areas been released yet?
No, they have not. So the Federal Register notice that just came out is a report from the Office of Management and Budget saying these are the criteria changes that we recommend making for defining the new metropolitan statistical areas. The comment window is still open on that. So I imagine if they get enough feedback, they could potentially change their minds on some of those criteria. But the current plan is make your comments to the feedback or make your comments to that proposal by March 19th. The data will come out, the redistricting data will come out before September 30th. The challenge window for CQR right now is scheduled to open October 1st and run to the end of June 2023. When that CQR program closes, the criteria for MSAs will be applied to those revised census counts or counts that have been changed because of challenges. And the new MSAs, Metropolitan and Micropolitan and combined statistical areas will be defined in 2023. And again, that's under the bigger caveat that COVID could adjust some of these timelines. But right now, that's the timeline that we're looking at.
Okay. I think we've got time for one, maybe two more. Mike Herman asks, was the 63% response rate the final response rate? What were some of the reasons for the lower rate when compared to the national average?
There's a lot that went into that. The 63.4% was the final self-response rate for the state of North Carolina. This was the first census to use an internet option for responding, which was a great asset for a lot of folks, especially with the impact of COVID. However, estimates show that about 700,000 households in North Carolina don't have internet access. Also, the impact of COVID meant that some of the operations for areas that normally have their census questionnaires hung on doorknobs, these are areas where they don't receive their mail usually at the door, they get it through PO boxes. COVID impacted some of those operations as well. So we think it was overall a COVID impact. We also think that there was a distrust and a big curve of overcoming folks' suspicion of the census. All of these happened at the same time. We obviously have a lot of college communities. We have a lot of group quarters, and the census operation was intended to count those college students where they were, usually would have been at the campuses, and those folks were relocated because of COVID. So I think the biggest challenge that we saw was really COVID, and that kind of overshadowed the larger message of making sure that the census count was important. However, I do want to underscore that those folks that didn't respond themselves through the self-response, they were picked up. The Census Bureau says that they counted 99.9% of every state's population. And that difference is the work that the census workers did on the ground of going door to door. So we're keeping our eyes open. We want to see the data when it comes out. But we do want folks to know there obviously was a lot involved with this census count. And if you do think that your numbers were off, if you do think the operation was flawed, do that CQR challenge from a local level. That's a free operation. After the CQR operation closes, your only challenge option will be a special census. That's a very expensive proposition, and the entire cost of that is borne by the local government. So take advantage of the free challenge if you think your numbers are off.
Appreciate that, Bob. I think that's all we have time for right now. Keep in mind, if we didn't get to your questions or you have other questions afterwards, that Bob and Mike are available via email, and hopefully you jotted down their information on their PowerPoints. If you did not, keep in mind that this session is being recorded, and you can get their contact information by looking at this presentation on the NCGIS Conference YouTube channel. So that's going to do it. I appreciate Dr. Mike Klein and Bob Coates this morning. And to all the attendees, thank you for attending, and keep in mind the closing session today at 1 o'clock, and enjoy the rest of the conference.